Believe it or not, but Flight Simulator has now been around for over 37 years, starting back in 1982. Over the years, it's pretty fair to say that it has come a long way, going from looking like some lines and pixels on a screen to vast skyboxes and detailed planes. Since Flight Simulator 2020 was revealed back at E3 in 2019, it's fair to say a lot of audiences, some of which weren't big simulator fans, were struck by how realistic and well presented this game was. A truly revolutionary looking title that could push forward graphical capabilities going into the next generation of consoles. Fast forward to August 2020 and the game released to huge praise from pretty much all publications. IGN gave it a solid 10 out of 10, saying it was unparalleled realism like no other simulation game. PC Gamer was not as generous, but still gave it a huge praise with an 89% review. And a lot of YouTube reviewers were also stating that the game was utterly unbelievable and the best in its class. But with an average Steam rating of 6 out of 10, the game looks to have been hit by a conflict between players and critics once again. So in this video I want to look at Flight Simulator 2020, look at its graphics, gameplay and its technical state to answer the question, is Flight Simulator really that good? So welcome to WiseFish, and this is my review of Microsoft's Flight Simulator 2020. My initial impression of this game was really not a positive one at all. After watching countless reviews from the publications before the release of the game, I went into Flight Simulator expecting a flawless experience from start to finish. We can all argue over IGN's review scores and their meanings, but when you give a game a 10 out of 10, that basically says to me it has no problems whatsoever and you are in for a perfect experience. Flight Simulator's installation process was not that in the slightest, and also made me want to completely give up with even trying to review this game. To be clear here, as I have to, I got this game as a review copy from Microsoft a day before the release of the full retail game. I got the Steam version as well, as that was my preferred place to play games. But trying to get this game running was an absolute nightmare. To start with, the game is only 500 megabytes to install, which I thought was just because I had a demo version of the game or something. Installing this very quickly, I was then brought into a windowed screen with a loading bar which lasted for about 30 minutes. I realised this was then bugged, shut the game down and tried again. When the game booted up again, I had the same problem. Multiple times this happened before I was able to finally get into the actual content manager to install the full version of the game. The install size was 91 gigabytes, which honestly, look, this is a huge game with a world map where you can go anywhere you want, detailed planes which I will speak about in a minute, and lots to see and do. The fact that this game is smaller than Warzone I feel needs to be praised. 91 gigabytes is really not bad at all considering the content. And yes, there are other things to add to that storage, but for the whole game to be this size, I feel was pretty well packaged together. The download time, however, was painfully slow. With my 60 megabytes a second download speed, this game was to take about 6 hours to fully install, which really doesn't add up in terms of maths. My problem then came from the fact that when I downloaded 80 gigabytes of the game then crashed, wiping away all my progress. I then booted it up again to the same loading bar, bugs, and even the full game menu just with no access to any activities or planes. I then finally got back to the content manager and got stuck on a 3 gigabyte remaining screen for over 3 hours with no progress being made. Contacting Microsoft on their help forums regarding this problem, I was then told that it was Steam who managed this and I should contact them, not helping me with the problem in the slightest. Finally, I deleted that 80 gigabyte file in my root folder and started the installation process all over again. Eventually, 5 hours later, the game was fully installed and I was able to play. However, I did have to keep the game open in the background on my PC, which wasn't really ideal, especially when editing software and other programs I use on a daily basis need the CPU, GPU and RAM to work to the highest standard. At first this worried me, as the fact that by this point, after what was 11 hours, I hadn't actually played a single bit of the game, and it was on Steam, a platform that has a strict 2-hour played refund policy. But luckily Valve came out and said this installation process would not affect refunds, which kind of relieved me a bit. But this process was far too frustrating for me, and for anyone wanting to just try the game as part of the PC Game Pass subscription, then this may be an instant turn off with how often it crashed. Got stuck on a loading screen, and well, for me personally, having to install the game twice before I could even get to do a basic flight was just a bit too much. Maybe this process is different from person to person, and maybe it was just an unlucky experience for me, and maybe it's different when it comes to the Windows Store installation process with Game Pass. But on the Microsoft Store I saw that it was expected to be 150 gigabytes, and speaking to a few people regarding their initial process, they had the same problems as me, especially when it came to the crashes. Whilst I don't think this is a make or break for the game, I got to admit it really did irritate me on how poorly it was implemented and how no one seemed to be talking about how often this game crashed when it just trying to load a basic menu. Initial impressions were very negative, to be completely honest, but luckily after this 91 gigabyte install was over, I was able to jump into a plane and get to experience what this was all about. I didn't think I'd have to say this considering the proof is in the name, but after seeing some people complaining this game is boring, not what they expected, or just, dare I say it, overrated, I feel like I have to acknowledge it. Flight Simulator is a simulator game. It's not like flying a plane in GTA or taking to the skies in your favourite first-person shooter. The whole mechanics, pacing and style of gameplay is completely different to everything else. Why am I even writing this in the script? It's a simulator, I mean, come on.
Very boring, not gonna lie. Bitch! It's a fucking sim! You stupid motherfucker! What the fuck do you want? This is literally a simulated flight. Shut the fuck up and put your AirPods on.
So how does Flight Simulator work as a sim game? Well, it's incredible and really can appeal to anyone from truly experienced pilots who have been playing the game since its conception to people who like the look of the trailer and want to try it out. There's really no barrier for entry, something that always worried me when I look at simulator games. For newcomers, there is a really well constructed tutorial which starts with teaching you the basics of how to start the plane, how to turn, how to take off, everything you need to know to get into the air and enjoy your flying experience. The co-pilot does the majority of the flying during this point and just walks you through the process of what you need to do. It's a pretty great way of getting you into the game for the first time. I will say though, I would have loved to have learned something about how planes actually work. Maybe talk about what allows the planes to get into the air, how turning actually works, what flaps do, some more details on some of the buttons, and just some all-round information about planes. For a simulator tutorial, I would have liked to have had some explaining as to how planes work. Don't use like a huge technical monologue, but maybe a bit more context than just increase speed, pull up and you're in the air. But apart from that, it's a really good tutorial. But when you get into the main heart of the game, this is where things start to shine. Flight Simulator has three main activities: bush trials, landing challenges and free flight. The bush trials in my eyes are fantastic ways of immersing you into this role of a pilot. The idea behind them is you get given point A and point B and your goal is to navigate to those off the beaten track locations, seeing the sights along the way. You get a map in the top right corner which allows you to see roughly where you are. There is a button which does display your exact location, but doing that takes away the real challenge of what this activity is. The main goal here is to follow the exact instructions that are displayed on your left of your screen. Directions such as follow the river through the mountains, then turn right towards the nearest town. It's a great way of testing your navigational skills, and being able to complete these tasks fills you with so much satisfaction as you navigate this new landscape you may have never explored before. You also get an achievement for doing it without the help, which basically says that this is how the game wants you to play it. The bush trials, as I say, really add to the immersion of being a pilot, and they were some of the most satisfying activities to complete as you fly around these large open areas looking for the points of interest that guide you to your next instruction to find your final destination. But speaking of satisfaction, the landing challenge, although it may sound pretty easy, is a challenge that really requires all of your focus, skill and patience. Here your goal is to fly to a specific airport and land your game chosen aircraft. This can range from a small propeller aircraft to a multi-engine jet. You also get different types of modes. You get iconic airports to land at, epic ones which are these really cool ones on the top of mountains or just hidden away in a valley, or super windy courses where you have to land a 747 in high winds, for example. Some of these are pretty standard when it comes to landing. For example, this one in Canada is a pretty pretty straightforward landing. Whereas other ones like this one here have you making a maneuver around the airport to come in and land, and let me tell you, it's really tricky, especially when the runway is really small. Once again though, super satisfying. Getting all the maneuvers right, getting the right line, the landing gear out at the right time, and the speed right to get that landing is such a good feeling when you are able to just put the brakes on and bring the plane to a complete stop. What makes it even more satisfying is the fact that you get points for your landing and get placed on an online leaderboard, letting you compare your scores to everyone around the world. I am determined to one day get within the top 100, but I need a lot of practice. The landing challenges put your flying skills to the real test. There is a lot of playing around with different tactics to try and get that landing to work, and the feeling of getting those landings is really something special. But then finally we have the free flying session, which allows you to do whatever you like as you pick through the many different planes to fly. This mode just gives you unparalleled opportunities to go and see whatever you like. I flew over Athens at night. I flew from my local tiny airport and over my local town. I flew through London in a storm, and I flew at the most northern airport in the world. There are no limitations to what you can do, and it is absolutely amazing. With this you can also turn on multiplayer and watch others around the world fly through their airspace. You can also have the live weather on so you can experience exactly what is going on outside, or you can customize the weather to be whatever you like, forcing a snowstorm in the middle of July. Having the freedom to go wherever you want with whatever plane you want is just so enjoyable, especially in a time like now where flying is very difficult because of the restrictions we all still face. My wife has always wanted to see the south of France near Monaco. We flew there. We wanted to see the city of New York. We flew there. And with those flights there was a sense of relaxation. I felt chill flying over the snow-capped mountains of the Alps. I was taken out of the real world and forgot about it for a bit, and I was just immersed in this digital version of our world. How does that even work? But I think the one thing that I love about this game so much was how easy it was for me to get into. Look, I'm not a simulator guy. I played Euro Truck Simulator and that's about it. I was worried that I would be awful at this game, and yeah, I'm not that great. But with the way the game gives you so many options to match your playstyle, you can go into this game with no real skill and be able to just fly over the cities and the countrysides of the world. Flight Simulator allows you to have tons of assists if you want to have an easy flying experience, or if you are a veteran, you can turn off every assist and the controls are completely within your hands, reducing your HUD, meaning you have to focus on your cockpit dials, forcing you to do cold starts and giving you problems to face when you are within mid-flight. This is a very accessible game for everyone of all player skills, and kudos to them for making a simulator game that anyone can pick up and just relax and enjoy. You can even tell the autopilot to take control and just sit back and take in the scenery, which is what I did most of the time to capture this footage. Although saying that, sometimes the autopilot is not the best when it comes to flying near mountains. The only real problem I had sometimes was when the game handed me back controls or launched me into the game, my plane would dramatically dart down into the ground, not giving me a chance to even work out what caused that or anything. Sometimes the game would load and I'd be immediately plummeting to my death. It was a weird experience that I wasn't sure if it was down to weather conditions, although most of the time it seemed sunny, or just the plane I was using, but it was odd most of the time. The game also uses sounds so well to add to your gameplay. The design of sound effects is truly amazing, allowing you to listen to all the engines, the propeller, the weather to make sure you know exactly what is going on. There is no music in the game, meaning when you are in that cockpit, your whole experience is making sure everything looks and sounds okay. Hearing an alarm go off or a rumble from behind is the most terrifying thing, especially on a long haul flight, but my god is it so immersive when you are in a small cockpit and you can hear the heavy storm rain hitting the window above you. It truly is the most immersive gameplay, and as IGN would say, it really makes you feel like you are flying a plane. Final thing I wanted to note, because I felt like it was crucial to my personal experience, and that was the controls. Now, as I said, I am not a simulator guy. I don't have a flight stick, as I didn't expect to receive a review copy, but I was curious, and with this game coming to the Xbox Series X, I wanted to see how it performed with the Xbox One controller, and I gotta say, I was amazed. Whilst it hasn't got all the gadgets and controls like the flight sticks do, the controller felt great to play with. Every button was utilised well, the joysticks handled the steering well with the trigger buttons handling the flaps. It just felt great to use and didn't feel like I was missing out on the full experience. Some buttons do double up on the controller and you have to press a few at the same time to operate them. There's also some controls which were not mapped to the controller, so I had to use the keyboard to activate them, but to be completely honest, this felt pretty cool to use. It felt like I had a full-on control board in front of me and my controller was the steering. Honestly, when this comes to Series X, you won't have to get a flight stick, as I feel the standard Xbox controller does a great job of controlling the planes. Saying that, the true experience of course comes from the flight stick and keyboard and mouse. But once again, Flight Simulator shows that it can be truly accessible to a wide variety of audiences and allows people from all experiences to try it out and see if they enjoy this flying experience. Overall though, Flying Simulator as a sim is one of the most relaxing and rewarding games I have ever played. The true freedom of being able to pick whatever plane you want, go wherever you want in a multitude of different weather conditions is truly spectacular. I had an absolute blast playing this game, and that is coming from someone who has never really played a flying simulator before. But I know now that this is a game I boot up whenever I just want to relax, listen to some music or a podcast, or just take in some of the beautiful sights of the world around us. And speaking of the sights around us, that brings me on to the thing that everyone loves about this game, the visuals. I think you'd be mad honestly if you look at this footage and think to yourself, this game doesn't look that great. Honest to God, Flight Simulator is one of the most beautiful games I have ever played, and a technological jump that I really did not expect. I mentioned in my gameplay section about the weather and how it made your game experience vary when flying and enhancing locations, but I cannot tell you how immersive it was to fly through a lightning storm in my home city of London. Seeing bolts of lightning dart across the sky as the whole world lights up is just breathtaking. When in the cockpit as well, being able to see the world down below you is truly a sight to behold, and the way the lights from the monitors hit the window causing this awesome reflection is just so damn cool. And this isn't even using ray tracing to cause this. How do I even talk about the graphics? They are just stunning. This moment here for me was just amazing, and I never felt so relaxed. Flying a Boeing 747 through the beautifully rendered clouds into a rising sun over the Forbidden City was just absolutely beautiful. I did this for at least half an hour and I didn't even realise how much time had actually passed. Going through clouds at times could actually be quite terrifying, as you can never be 100% sure what is on the other side. Looking down through them to see towns reveal themselves was really cool, but when flying through a mountain section not knowing where you will emerge was really cool but quite tense, especially if you don't look at the monitors, which isn't part of the game, but I still found pretty fun. Nighttime is when the game stands out as well. When flying over Athens, the golden lights of the city below lit up the world and created a real warm and quite magical image when flying over it. It's just amazing how well this lighting engine makes the world feel, the way it bounces off the plains, the way it seeps through the clouds and lights patches of the earth whereas some remain in the shade. It was really cool, and something I've honestly never really seen before. I even saw a double rainbow when I was flying through a snowy mountain area. I circled this area for so long because of it, thinking it was some rare sight. It was just amazing. The lighting didn't feel artificial is what I'm trying to say. Flying across this world felt super realistic and made this feel like the most realistic simulator I'd ever seen and played. I can honestly see why this has been so praised for its technological achievement. But what is most amazing about this game is the actual maps themselves. Flight Simulator utilizes the new incredible Azure AI and satellite images from Bing Maps. Yep, I know, Bing. Who'd have thought? With the use of these two things, you were able to visit anywhere on the planet and get to see hidden villages, small towns and landscapes that have all been processed by their satellite images. Whilst this game really does a ton of rendering when venturing through new places, I didn't feel like it was much of a distraction. In fact, I was more amazed that smaller areas that I know, like my hometown, was so detailed, with roads exquisitely detailed, almost to the point where I felt like I was going to see my fat ass playing this damn game. It's like the street view in Google Maps. maps but made into a full-on virtual world. I'm still blown away looking at this footage. Sadly, not all the locations have had the highest levels of satellite imagery, meaning the textures are pretty horrible to look at times. Some jetties and their boats were flat 2D images, which was pretty sad to see, pulling you out of the immersion a little bit. But to be fair, sometimes I was flying very low on these areas, meaning it was far more obvious. But when you are like 3,000 or 5,000 feet in the air, you really cannot tell. There's also the small details of the cars driving down the roads, animals in fields, and the other AI controlled planes flying through the world. That was the icing on the top of the cake. It felt like a living, breathing world and really does immerse you into it so much. Although the M25 in the UK has moving cars on it, so you know, my realism was shattered at that point. There's also this really cool feature where you can go into your hangar and have a look around at the planes you have. Here you have some really beautiful lighting coming through the hangar bay doors, and you are able to circle around your selected plane or get inside the cockpit and look at all the dials and their details. It's great to see the up close details and fantastic for anyone who loves planes in general. It also has people walking around the hangar, which looked awesome, and funnily enough their animations actually looked amazing. I would have loved to have seen more people within this game, maybe guiding your planes in and out, because they really look really well made. But anyway, I don't want to keep barking on about how good the graphics are within this game, because you can really see for yourself how gorgeous this game is. From little details from the rivets in the planes to the cockpit controls, all the way to the truly gorgeous landscapes that take your breath away. The game is beautiful, but what does it cost? Well, when it comes to performance, this is where things get a bit Now, a lot of people were saying that simulators are always taking on CPU, RAM and GPU because obviously they have to render important things like the planes, the controls and the environments. That's understandable, and with this brand new technology Flight Simulator 2020 does, it of course means that it is very difficult to run on modern hardware though. On my Ryzen 3700X with 32GB of RAM and an RTX 2070 Super, I was able to run this game at 2K around about consistent rate of 50 frames per second on medium to high with a few tweaks to the settings. To get a consistent 60 frames per second plus on this game, I had to lower all my settings down to medium and change to 1080p. But the problem with changing down to 1080p was the game just became an absolute eyesore, as the game doesn't seem to be able to handle resolution changes at all. Whilst I know my PC isn't at the top end of the spectrum, I can usually run modern games on ultra and still retain a high FPS. But with Flight Simulator, I had to settle with the fact that getting 60 frames per second and above constantly was a luxury, and 40 frames per second was ultimately the goal to get. The hardest times was of course where the most rendering occurred. New York was an absolute tank on the frames per second, getting me down to 21 frames per second at times, making it almost unbearable, especially from the cockpit view. Athens at night, as beautiful as it was also a huge tank because of how built up it was and how many light sources there were on screen. All these things though to me were understandable, and whilst I'm sad I couldn't get a solid 60 frames per second, I completely understand, because this game truly is the next generation of graphics. I've heard that 60 frames per second is much more accessible when it comes to the higher cards such as RTX 2080 Ti, but even then the game is almost impossible to run at 4K, something that maybe the new RTX 3000 series will be able to do when it releases. This isn't a big problem for me because it's not something I really need running at a high frame rate compared to like a first person shooter or something. Honestly, didn't mind 40 frames per second at times, and there were even times where I could bump it up to ultra just to get the glamour shots like this one, and I was still able to get 35 frames per second, which was fine with me for the shot. But if you are someone who frequently states it's got to be over 60 frames per second at all time, then this may not be the game for you unless you have the top end hardware. But you have to understand this is an intense game, as all simulators usually are. With the rendering, this will also add to your internet usage. If you are on a data plan, then this game may be one for later down the line when you get unlimited if you are able to. This game will tear through your data at times, especially if you venture through heavy city areas with lots of assets. You can turn off the internet feature, but sadly this means that the game doesn't look as pretty and has been shown to make the visuals look pretty blurry at times. There is a mode that can download the required files for places you go often. Here you download the media cache for locations you visit frequently, meaning the texture quality is better and popping is reduced as the game has those files on your computer. This is great for someone like me who travels over London or New York, as I have those files on my SSD at all times, meaning it's not as intense when flying over them, and I did see big improvements to my gameplay after I downloaded them, although it does take a while to get them. But finally, as we are more on the technical side of the graphics, I wanted to state that if you are wanting to get this game and witness the views for yourself, getting this on SSD is essential. On hard drive, this game will be extremely slow and rendering will be an absolute nightmare, meaning the game will tank hard a lot of the time. SSD is the way forward, sadly, another sign that this is indeed a next generational game. Visually though, Flight Simulator is unmatched and one of the most beautiful games I have experienced. It is a huge ask on computers, and sadly if you want to play this on a low-end PC or a laptop to relax, then it will need to be one that can really take the workload. Maybe with the next generation of hardware coming out, this game will be able to run with ease, but right now, because of the technological advancement they have made with the game, do expect to be running this game at least 40 to 50 frames per second constantly, unless you have an absolute beast of a PC. My biggest disappointment was that the Xbox did not display its true potential and its hardware with this game in particular. I would have loved to have seen the world's most powerful console playing the most technologically impressive game out there. Could it run at a solid 60 frames per second, or would the game be forced to play in 4K, meaning there are a ton of downgrades to its post-processing? I feel like this was a missed opportunity for Microsoft to display the power of X. This could have won me over, but honestly, on PC, this game is absolutely gorgeous to look at and once again extremely relaxing. I want to end on some final problems I have with the game. I went on a long bit at the beginning about the painful installation process, and I still stand by that. I think there must have been a better way to get the files for this game on your PC without frequent crashes and having the game open for over 5 hours. But my other problem was really with how often I had this game freeze up and crash on me. On Steam, a lot of the negative comments about this game are about the technical problems this game has. System crashes, game crashes, and just unresponsive things within the game. Whilst I didn't experience these problems as much as some people state, I do have to say this game did crash quite often. Every time I plugged in a controller, the game would crash and I'd have to end it on Task Manager. But sometimes when playing, I would just experience it shut off completely with no notice that it had a problem. As I say, this didn't happen all the time, but it still happened regardless. The loading times are also extremely slow with waits of up to 5 minutes sometimes. But to be completely honest, this game has to render a full world with tons of little details, so to be fair, that's something that can be forgiven. I'd also have times where textures would just not pop and cars would just drive through the ground, or other cars which just look pretty horrible at times. Some areas also had sharp textures piercing the sky, and there were just some times where I felt like the game hadn't quite got it yet. But again, there is so much on the screen. Can you blame a few technical problems like this? For me, it can be looked over, I think. All round here though, I do feel like the game just needs a little bit of a polish. Having the game crash takes a calm, relaxing flight into an instant irritation, pulling you instantly out of that experience. It can also ruin some long haul flights which can last a long time, and if the game crashes during a 3-hour flight, that can really cause some anger for the player, especially if they had dedicated a good 2 hours already to it. Technical wise, I think that some things can be forgiven, but crashes need to be fixed, and I'm sure they will going forward. My other big problem, however, is the microtransactions this game has. When it comes to things like planes, I can somewhat understand the paywall. At the end of the day, these planes are so detailed, like I said in the graphics section of the video. From their rivets to the small controls, everything is so detailed and different from the last plane. They also have to know exactly what is in every real world plane to make sure it is the full simulation experience. So to some extent, I completely understand this factor and why they are behind paywalls. To some extent. When it comes to things like London assets, however, this is where I have a problem. I don't really like the fact that I have to pay £6 to be able to see a few London iconic buildings within the game, like the Gherkin building and the London Eye. Those to me are what makes London stand out and worth seeing. You had the Statue of Liberty in New York and the Empire State Building, but taking out the most memorable buildings in London, in the heart of London as well, and sticking them behind a paywall seems just a bit unfair, especially for anyone living in London who wants to see their own city. It takes away the identity of that main city of a country. Maybe this annoys me because I see them on a regular basis when I step foot outside my actual house, but I feel like this ruins the identity of London and don't like that it's been held back behind a £6 paywall. Not a massive amount of money, but you know, still, is this just a pay for its likeness to be shown off because of rights management or something? If so, that's pretty unfair. Leeds Airport is also held back behind a paywall. Why? Why Leeds? It's a detailed thing, it looks amazing, but why these specific things? It doesn't make sense to me. It feels like UK had to pay extra just for this damn game. Although I moan a lot and I sound like I'm having a big go, I don't have the biggest problem with the microtransactions as of yet, but I do worry about them in the long run. I know how money hungry some simulator games can get when they sell things like planes, buildings and other things, and I just worry that some iconic landmarks or really great things to see will be held back to sell to the player. I really don't get why the London landmarks are held back from the base game, but that does disappoint me a little, and I just worry that going forward this game will sell a ton of assets to the player through this store. I understand planes being sold because of their details, but please don't start selling landmarks and other things like that for ridiculous prices. But overall, to answer the question I set out, is Flight Simulator really that good? My answer is absolutely yes. The game has some of the best simulated gameplay that is accessible to people of all different abilities and really opens the simulator genre to players of all kinds, especially with the fact that this game immediately came out on the Game Pass, meaning it had a huge influx of players on day one, some who may have never played a simulator game before. Graphically, this game is a masterpiece. Although extremely heavy on hardware, it is an absolute spectacle to behold with some beautiful scenery, locations and a lighting engine that took my breath away multiple times. When it comes to the game on a technical standard, this is where I'm a bit hesitant however. I feel like it needs a few patches to make sure it runs at full potential, and its installation process in my eyes is not the best welcome to a new game. Crashes, failed to load textures and other errors need to be fixed for me to say this was a perfect game of its genre. But for now, Microsoft's Flight Simulator 2020 is an incredible adventure that everyone should experience, especially as it's free for Game Pass owners on PC. I'd have loved to have seen this on the Series X to see its true power, and I'd love to see this game evolve with new activities and multiplayer events. Hell, even a co-op mode would be amazing where one of you has to navigate your surroundings and the other has to be the pilot or something like that, like with the Bush Trials. Who knows? But as of right now, despite a few problems I have with the game, I am absolutely loving Flight Simulator. It is one of the most relaxing games I have ever played, and after a long day editing, being able to fly through the clouds towards a rising sun is the best way to end the day. But those are my thoughts on Flight Simulator 2020. Have you played it? What did you think? Let me know in the comments below. Once again, thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it, and are maybe swayed into trying this game out. I'd like to thank my Patrons real quick. Big shout out to our Big Fish, Duquesne23, our Sharks, Morgan Brazier, Dylan and JP, and our huge Megalodons, JJD893 and Sinus. Thank you all so much for your continued support. It really helps, especially during this horrible recession we are going through right now. If you'd also like to support this channel, I'll leave my Patreon, Discord and Twitter links in the description below for if you'd like to support me on there, or you can become a member of this channel by hitting the join button below, and you get some cool little badges for if you join a stream and you want to chat in there, but you know, it's all down to you. But that's all for now. Thank you all for watching once again, and I shall see you all in the next one. This is your pilot signing off. Cheers.